Hello, I'm James Ezimoha and you're watching AnewZ. Let's see your headlines. The United States and China extend the tariff truce deadline to November. European leaders say that the outcome of Alaska meeting must respect Ukraine's sovereignty. Wildfires continue to spread across Europe amid heat wave. Trade tensions between the world's two largest economies have just hit a pause again. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order extending the tariff truce with China by another 90 days.
The clock was ticking and the tariff deadline for China was looming, but President Donald Trump extended the US-China tariff truce by another 90 days. It now stretches to the 10th of November. The tax hikes had been due to expire on Tuesday at 12:01 a.m. The steep tariffs were set to climb to 145% on Chinese goods and 125% on US products. But instead, rates remain at 30% for Chinese imports and 10% for American goods for the time being. President Trump made the announcement on his Truth Social platform. During a news conference on Monday, he had said, "We'll see what happens," whilst highlighting that his relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping was good. China said the extension would provide stability to the global economy. But analysts say it's far from smooth sailing. A senior trade official calls it a strategic pause, one that lets retailers stock up without fear of a tariff shock. Market reaction was immediate. Asia's stock markets rallied. The extension has brought breathing room for negotiations around trade imbalances, market access, national security and semiconductors. Trump has suggested that he would meet with Xi before the end of the year if a trade agreement was struck, and he says that he's getting very close.
President Donald Trump announced the deployment of 800 National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. and placed the city's police force under federal control, despite violent crime in 2024 hitting a 30-year low. He says rising lawlessness justifies expanding executive powers in democratic-run cities. With Washington in his sights, hundreds of federal agents are already deployed, and Trump hasn't ruled out using the military. Attorney General Pam Bondi will take over the city's police department. Meantime, critics say he's creating a crisis to centralize power. Let's talk to John Kavilik, senior editor at Issue Insight, to help us unpack this development. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, how can this unexpected measure be explained?
The easiest way to explain it is that there have been recent issues in Washington, D.C. with well-known individuals getting harmed or getting killed. And that usually begins the process for politicians of wanting to respond because they don't want to look weak. President Trump never wants to look weak. And so the statistic that you mentioned, down 30% violent crime, President Trump looks at that statistic and says, you're right, 30% down for everyone. But for one person who's a victim of crime, it's up 100% for that person. So that's how he's looking at this. The challenge will be, he's great at setting up the production to go in, but 30 days from now, he's going to have to make another decision on what to do and how do you measure success? And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, how to measure success.
Now, Trump spoke of a wave of lawlessness in Washington when violent crime in the city in 2024 was at a 30% low. So is this a false pretext?
It's a Trumpian pretext. So there is some fact to it, and then there is some massaging effect. I went to school in Washington, George Washington University. When I was there, it was a different Washington. You had some very challenging areas of the city. Large African-American population, a large minority population. Today, it's a much different city. Areas, the Navy Yard and that, which have been decrepit, are now full of very high-end apartments and restaurants. But areas such as Georgetown, the well-known area in Washington, D.C., it's challenging in terms of homelessness, in terms of young groups of young men and young women running around and scaring people. So he does have going for him the optics, which is Washington isn't looking good. And then you have these well documented and very public issues of people getting hurt or people getting killed. So he's using the facts to massage something larger that then he can go in and say, I'm the savior. And that's basically what he's setting up here is I'm here to save you and only I can save you.
Now, Trump's announcement in his latest attempt to target Democratic-run cities by exerting executive power over traditionally local issues, would you agree with this statement?
Well, I would agree that that's been the statistics are showing that he's much more inclined to focus on cities and states that have Democratic governors, Democratic controlled legislatures, Democratic mayors, Democratic supervisors. And those tend to be the larger cities. And by definition, larger cities are more complex and they generally are more dynamic and they have more people that have and more people that don't have. And you have higher crime simply because you have more people living in close proximity. So, you know, he is taking advantage of the optics for him, which is Republican, law and order, Democrat, chaos, and let people run rampant. And so he's playing that. And, you know, he won the election in 2024, roughly half of the country. So he's playing to the half that like what he has to say.
Now, finally, Trump suggested similar measures in New York and Chicago. Does the presence of military personnel on the streets undermine the image of the United States as a true democracy?
It doesn't look good. And particularly because we have the local police, then you generally, for counties, you have the sheriffs who have wider latitude. Then you have the National Guard from the individual states. And now you've got military, frontline military. So it gives the impression that everything's out of control. But for Donald Trump, he wants the impression to be, if you look at the states where I won, those are in control. Those people behave themselves. You look at the states that I lost, and that's because of, quote, wokeness. That is because of diversity, equity, inclusion policies. That's because there's too much permissiveness. There's a lot of coddling, and people need to get tough. And if they get tough, they're going to have well-run cities. And the only way to do that is vote the Democrats out and vote the Republicans in. And if it takes military soldiers and vehicles and tanks on the street to do it, then I'm going to do it because I'm a tough guy. And 50% of the country's with me. The other 50%, I really don't care about.
Well, thank you very much for your time and insight.
Thank you.
Preparations have already started for the Alaska meeting, although the exact location has not yet been confirmed. With security measures already being put in place, residents have expressed mixed views about the high-profile summit.
Local residents in Anchorage in Alaska have mixed views on the upcoming historic meeting between US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday. The exact location has not yet been officially announced, but preparations have already begun. People living in the city say they view the day as both an opportunity and a challenge.
Well, I think it's really a fascinating opportunity for Alaska to shine in what we can do for those kind of venues. I think it's a safe venue for both the leaders to come here. We have a huge Air Force base and Army base next to Anchorage, and so I think that it's going to be a safe location for them. I think it'll also be very exciting for Alaska and for the city of Anchorage to be a part of something like that. I think it's fairly historic.
I think it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate against Trump when he's here. We spend a lot of time far away trying to send messages to our congressmen, senators, saying all of the things that we really find to be reprehensible about this administration. And we'll be here demonstrating when he's here.
The Federal Aviation Administration will close the airspace around Anchorage. Traffic delays are also expected, with details on which roads will be closed to be announced in the coming days. For security reasons, state officials and the local mayor have not yet revealed the venue for the summit, and the White House has declined to comment on the matter. Historically, such high-level meetings have been held at airports or military bases. Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson and Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport are considered the most suitable locations.
Europe has now overtaken the United States in total financial aid to Ukraine, providing over $35 billion as military production on the continent surges. Meanwhile, in Kharkiv, prosecutors are collecting and cataloging thousands of Russian missiles, rockets and drones, evidence they say will be crucial for a future international war crimes tribunal. Our Fikrat Dolukanov reports from the graveyard of Russian weapons.
Europe has bypassed the US in terms of financial aid to Ukraine. The total amount of the aid reached 35.1 billion euros, which is 4.4 billion euros more than American aid to Ukraine. It happens on the background of European countries increasing their military production. Financial Times reports that European countries have increased their military production in 3 times since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. At the same time, the countries are waiting for the summit in Alaska between Trump and Vladimir Putin. Ukrainian officials are largely skeptical about this meeting, as well as many foreign analysts. They think that Putin will use this meeting in order to extend the duration of the war and to gain favorable grounds for himself during the negotiations. We are now in Kharkiv. We're standing in the graveyard of rockets, missiles and drones launched by Russia during those 3 years of war. And together with us is the spokesperson of the prosecutor's office of Kharkiv, Dmytro Chubenko. I would like him to tell us a bit more about what was going on here during this over 3 years period. Could you please tell us how is the situation on ground and how this all has been collected here, how this idea appeared for the first time?
This area is a storage site for physical evidence of war crimes committed by the Russians. Here, about 15 to 20 main types of munitions used by the Russians to strike the city of Kharkiv are presented. And these are only the munitions used to hit the city itself. In total, more than 22,000 strikes have been carried out across Kharkiv and the Kharkiv region, using missiles, artillery shells, mortars and multiple rocket launch systems. Systems such as Grad BM-21, Uragan, Tornado, Smersh, ballistic missiles, S-300, Iskander, cruise missiles, Caliber, Shaheds, Jirani and others were employed. All these types of weapons are represented in this collection. Their primary purpose is to provide evidence in future tribunals proving the guilt of the Russian Federation. For these crimes, establishing their legal responsibility for these attacks, especially since some of this weaponry was manufactured within the independent Russian Federation. Russia is the main producer and operator of these weapons, and certain modifications and types are found exclusively in Russian arsenals, which serves as one form of evidence of their involvement. Additionally, the trajectories of missile flights recorded by the Ukrainian Defense Forces and their partners, as well as other types of evidence collected from site inspections, utilizing advanced technologies to analyze impact angles and geolocation, all contribute to confirming Russia's responsibility for these war crimes.
What's the latest addition to this unfortunate collection?
One recent trend among the Russians is the use of loitering munitions, primarily the Geran 2, which Russia has already established production of within its territory. These are launched dozens of times a week against the city and the Kharkiv region. These are small aircraft type, UAVs, equipped with damaging elements, mostly homemade explosive devices or RPG projectiles, attached grenades, and similar payloads. Such attacks do not target military objectives. They are carried out against residential neighborhoods in Kharkiv to create panic, suppress resistance, and inflict moral and psychological pressure on the population. Overall, the Russians aim to terrorize the local population through these attacks, which lack any military purpose, and are solely intended to affect civilians psychologically.
After the war ends and everything is finished, what do you think will be done with all this? What are the plans for all this?
First, we preserve these munition fragments as physical evidence. They have already been examined by Ukrainian explosive ordnance disposal specialists. The exact weapon types and modifications have been documented. Later, during tribunal proceedings, further examinations by experts, prosecutors, and judges will be necessary, and some of these munition fragments may be sent for expert analysis at the tribunal and brought to court hearings. The world community now understands who is waging this war and who committed this aggression. However, to legally establish the fact of aggression and its consequences for the world community, the tribunal will consist of judges from various countries who may not fully understand what is happening in Ukraine, how Russia started this war, why and how often it has attacked. For them, this will all be new. While Ukrainians have already experienced this, the tribunal judges and prosecutors, many of whom will be foreigners, will need to be shown this evidence anew and start this process from the beginning. Therefore, Kharkiv prosecutors are working to document these attacks in real time, recording detailed information about the victims, missile trajectories, types, models, and launch sites. All this is essential for the tribunal. In other words, we are working on the legal front to hold Russia accountable for these crimes.
In Ukraine's frontline city of Kharkiv, an architect has transformed an abandoned dormitory into a lifeline for elderly and disabled residents displaced by war. Fikrat Dolukanov has more.
Коли війна почалась, я взагалі була за кордоном.
When the war began, I was actually abroad on an architectural tour because I'm an architect. But I decided on the very same day the war started to buy a ticket and return to Ukraine to support the army and to support the civilian population. I was back in 3.5 days, and since then I haven't left Kharkiv. In Kharkiv, at first, the city was surrounded by Russian troops, and we had only one road leading to Kiev. Many people were left trapped in their flats, locked inside. I joined forces with other people, about 30 volunteers, to search for these people, rescue them, and get them out of their homes. Then we rented this dormitory. It was in a very neglected state, with no proper facilities. I had a friend who had no legs, and she gave me many phone numbers, because people with such special needs tend to keep in touch with one another. In this way, we found 270 people. Later, we realized we couldn't look after each of them individually. That's when we decided to rent this building. That was on the 20th of March 2022. Step by step, we cleaned the place, brought it into order, and now we have 60 residents here. Over the course of the war, about 300 people have passed through what we call this shelter. We call it a big family, because I want these people to feel as though they are part of a large family. These people were born in villages, because Ukraine used to be a rural, agrarian country. So we try to recreate for them the atmosphere they had in their childhood. Because, step by step, they become like children again, losing their skills day by day. But they are children without a future. We also try to invite many people to visit them. For example, musicians giving concerts. And we take them to the botanical garden, the zoo, and to church every week. In this way, we also begin to build civil society here, because many volunteers get involved in this work. We start to form friendships, and it becomes a very large and rich community of helpers. This is a huge problem for Kharkiv, because we haven't surrendered the city. But it is constantly on the edge, on the front line. We're 20 kilometers from the Russians on one side and 30 kilometers on the other. We have 500,000 internally displaced people, 130,000 of them elderly or with special needs, and 30,000 of them in need of round-the-clock care. In Kharkiv, there are only 8 facilities that can provide this kind of care. Before the war, they had 3,000 residents in total. Now they have 6,000. They're overcrowded, and there's nothing else available. Volunteers bring people to us from the front line. Local communities call us to ask if they can bring people here, and the regional center also sends them to us. Every foundation, I've realized, helps once, for the sake of making a picture, telling the story of how good they are. But this continuity, keeping it going endlessly, is very hard. We have 15 staff members who lost their jobs during the war and found work here. They're very responsible, and we're deeply grateful that they care for our elderly residents, that they treat them with attention, respect, and empathy, real empathy, which is so important for us. The main thing is to give people maximum independence, to teach them to walk with crutches, or to move independently in a wheelchair. And I have a studio that designed this territory you see here. It's 1.3 hectares. I believe that if we build more accommodation to European standards, plus a restaurant, library, and administrative building, we could rent out rooms to people who can afford it. With that income, we could support those with very small pensions and no family to care for them.
Дуже важко, і треба якось, я думаю, знаходити, рішення цієї проблеми.
Yeah, so I was working for the Department of Veterans Affairs in the United States, working with veterans in the hospital, and this population that we have here is very similar to that. Although they're not combatants, they have a lot of the same issues: PTSD, injuries from the war, whether their house was blown up or they were injured in some other way. They have the stress issues, the anxiety issues, and a lot of the same medical conditions. So there is a big similarity. We try to make this a place where there's respect and where there's dignity and where people can live a somewhat normal life in spite of being 25 kilometers from the Russian border. We have a lot of people who either have learned to walk by themselves at home in the past, or they come here and they've been bedridden for 3 months or 3 years or 5 years, and they say, I never had any rehab, I didn't have the money, I didn't have the money for a hip replacement. So we have a number of people here who we have started to work with and who are now walking again. Very slowly, but they can walk again. We'd start doing stuff, there's not a word spoken, and he knows all the exercise, and then we're doing stuff with weights and bands, and we're working the biceps, and we're working the triceps, and we're working the shoulders, and we're working the chest, and the forearms, and the legs, doing things with the legs.
You don't really need words for that.
So you don't need words for that, and it just is very smooth, and we chat about different things, and we use Google Translate, but it's a workout session for 30 minutes where he gets a great workout and he knows exactly what to do, because we've been doing it for 2.5 years. Now when someone new comes in and they have had a hip fracture that was not repaired, or they've had a stroke and they've never had any rehab and they haven't been out of bed for 5 years. Now I brought weights, I brought different supplies. I've had a bunch of donors in the United States who said, hey, we want to be a part of this. We're going to get you exercise bands. We're going to get you wrist weights. We're going to get you devices for foot drop. It's great, you know, being able to be productive and change someone's lives like this is just it's an incredible thing. Here, they're getting something that they have not gotten in the past, and that's people paying attention to them and saying, "Yeah, you've got this issue. Let's work on it. Let's figure it out. It doesn't matter if you don't have any money.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out. Let's make it work. Let's get your life back together again."
All this and much more will be in the full broadcast of the Frontlines Ukraine documentary to be premiered soon on AnewZ. Now, ahead of this week's Trump-Putin summit, European leaders, with the exception of Hungary, insist any deal must respect Ukraine's sovereignty. They stressed that talks cannot proceed without Ukraine's consent and must come alongside a ceasefire. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán refused to back the declaration, saying the EU should seek its own talks with Moscow rather than setting conditions for a summit it wasn't invited to.
A statement by the EU 26 leaders this morning and of course by the President.
Southern Europe remains in the grip of fierce wildfires, with France, Spain, Portugal and the Balkans battling blazes fanned by scorching heat, strong winds and bone-dry conditions.
Firefighters are battling blazes across southern Europe on Tuesday in France, Spain, Portugal and Albania. The flames come due to the heat wave, as well as dry conditions and windy weather, which has all helped fuel the spread. In southern France, crews in Saint-Vallier continued to tackle hotspots from one of the nation's largest fires since 1949. The blaze, which began on the 5th of August, has burned 16,000 hectares, killed one person, injured 25, and destroyed dozens of homes. Authorities warned the risk of reignition remains high, linking its severity to climate change. In Spain, lightning ignited a wildfire north of Madrid late on Monday, forcing people to evacuate from their homes in Soto de Viñuelas and Fuente el Fresno. Winds of more than 70 kilometers per hour fanned the flames, gravely injuring one person and closing the M607 highway. In the south, more than 2,000 people, including tourists, had to flee from Tarifa as a separate blaze tore through eucalyptus and pine forests in the Sierra de la Plata mountains amid a heat wave pushing temperatures to 42 degrees Celsius. Portugal faced a major outbreak in Trancoso, where nearly 700 firefighters have been battling since Saturday to contain the flames, worsened by high temperatures and strong winds. Around 52,000 hectares have burned nationwide this year. That's above the seasonal average. In Albania, helicopters and ground crews fought flames after a weekend surge of wildfires across the Balkans, where extreme heat and drought have left conditions ripe for more outbreaks.
The situation is equally alarming in northwestern Turkey, where a fast-moving wildfire is sweeping through the province of Çanakkale. The blaze has already destroyed several homes and forced hundreds of residents to evacuate. Authorities have shut down key transport routes in the region.
Hundreds of residents were forced to evacuate their homes on Monday as a wildfire swept through forested areas near the center of Turkey's northwestern Çanakkale province. The blaze, fanned by strong winds and high temperatures, destroyed dozens of houses and vehicles, according to local authorities. Interior Minister reported that 187 people were rescued by sea and 161 by land. People had to flee a university campus, military facilities and residential neighborhoods. more than 700 personnel, supported by planes, helicopters and firefighting vehicles, were deployed to battle the flames.
It's a terrible incident. We've never experienced anything like this before. As you can see, houses, vehicles, everything burned down. May God help us.
Helicopters were seen scooping water from the Dardanelles Strait to douse hotspots, while police water cannons tackled blazes that reached residential buildings.
When we first arrived, my car and our house were slightly damaged. May God help everyone. Overall, we've survived a terrible disaster. Apparently, it's still ongoing.
The city's airport, a section of the highway, and parts of the strait were temporarily closed. The Turkish Meteorological Service reported temperatures of 33 degrees Celsius and wind speeds of up to 66 kilometers per hour. Conditions that fueled the spread of the fire.
Georgian President Mikail Gusman is in Ankara on a two-day official visit, marking his first trip to Turkey. He met Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan for bilateral talks, followed by a joint press conference. Talks focused on regional cooperation, with both leaders stressing the Middle Corridor trade route linking East and West. They agreed the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway must reach full capacity. Erdogan said bilateral trade has already surpassed $3 billion and set a new target of $5 billion. Meanwhile, President Gusman hailed Turkey's support for Georgia's EU bid as extremely important. Georgia's Parliament Speaker Shalva Papashvili has criticized the European Union over what he calls double standards in responding to Russian aggression. Nini Nikolashvili has more.
Parliament Speaker Shalva Papashvili said that the European Union failed to fully enforce the ceasefire agreement brokered after the 2008 August war and did not impose sanctions on Russia despite its continued military presence in Georgia's breakaway regions. He contrasted this with Europe's swift and extensive support for Ukraine following Russia's 2022 invasion. The six-point ceasefire plan mediated by then-French President Nicolas Sarkozy called on immediate end of the hostilities, the withdrawal of Russian forces to pre-war positions and unhindered access to the humanitarian aid. While Georgia met its obligations, Russian troops remain in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and borderization continue along the occupation lines. Papashvili argued that the absence of sanctions in 2008 gave the wrong signal to Moscow, allowing the occupation to become the permanent reality. He says that this failure reduced the credibility of international agreements and undermined regional security. This year's anniversary comes as Georgia seeks for closer ties with the European Union, with officials in Tbilisi urging Brussels to match their political statement with concrete actions. Papashvili says that honoring and appreciating past commitments is essential for building trust and addressing unsolved regional and security issues in the region. It's Nini Nikolashvili reporting from Tbilisi, AnewZ.
Kaja Kallas, the European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief, spoke on the phone with the foreign ministers of Azerbaijan and Armenia. She praised the joint declaration signed by Azerbaijan, the US and Armenia, welcomed the deal and plans to end the OSCE Minsk group. She also discussed Azerbaijan-EU relations and security issues. On the same day, she spoke with Armenia's Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan, who called the Washington agreements an important step and thanked the EU for their support. They also talked about Armenia-EU cooperation and regional inclusion. Experts say these talks are key for peace and stability in the region. A US-based television channel, Newsmax, has aired a special program dedicated to the Washington summit between the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia, mediated by President Donald Trump. The program discussed in detail the significance of the Washington meeting, its regional and global importance, as well as the role of the United States as a mediator. The guest of the program was Azerbaijan's ambassador to the United States, Mr. Kazar Ibrahim.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was great It was a historic moment, as my president said. It happened in the #1 capital in the world under the leadership of President Trump, who is a peacemaker. And it's quite notable that here, Azerbaijan and Armenia signed this joint declaration, and now the doors, windows, hearts, everything is open to have real peace in the region, to have it integrated not only with neighbors, but with the entire world. But we had a conflict for more than 30 years. We had lands under occupation, there were ethnic cleansings, there were a lot of refugees and IDPs who still cannot go back because of landmines. But what happened, all the negotiations in the last 30 years, negotiated, mediated by OSCE, didn't yield any positive results. And it's, I think, quite a diplomatic miracle that President Trump, within this very short period of time, managed to help us. Of course, we had direct negotiations with Armenia. That helped a lot, because when you talk to each other, that's very important, because it's, at the end of the day, it's you gonna live with each other. It's your people gonna interact with each other. It's your leadership who gonna talk to each other. So that helped. But at the same time, when you have a statesman, a leader, and a peacemaker like Donald Trump, it always helped. And when he stepped up, now we are in a position when we have the documents and all the roads are open for peace and prosperity of the region.
Mikail Gusman, a veteran of Russia's TASS news agency, has left his post after nearly 3 decades. His departure comes weeks after a high-profile appearance in Azerbaijan and is now followed by personal tribute from the head of China's Xinhua news agency.
China's top news executive has sent a personal letter to Mikail Gusman, the former first deputy director general of Russia's TASS agency, praising his decades of work in international media diplomacy. Fu Hua, president of Xinhua, called Gusman an outstanding leader and dear friend, crediting him with strengthening ties between the two agencies through joint projects such as the BRICS Media Summit, the Asia-Pacific News Agencies Assembly, and several cultural exhibitions. Gusman, born in Baku, Azerbaijan, joined TASS in the early 1990s and became its first deputy director general in 1999. He is known as the creator and host of Formula of Power, a television interview series featuring over 500 conversations with world leaders from George Bush and Jacques Chirac to Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Abdullah II of Jordan. Beyond broadcasting, he has represented Russia in UNESCO's media programs and served as a bridge between Russian journalism and international institutions. His resignation was formalized this summer by a decree from Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. The agency gave no reason for the change. Just weeks earlier, Gusman took part in the Shusha Global Media Forum in Azerbaijan, attended by journalists and officials from dozens of countries. In a question to President Aliyev, he praised Azerbaijan's diplomatic strategy and compared it to the artistry of a master violinist. The exchange drew mixed reactions in Russia, though no official connection has been made between that appearance and his departure. Speaking to AnewZ, Gusman said he was not ready to discuss his resignation.
Just yet. Well, we agreed to do this interview, and thank you for calling me. I assumed your interest was partly because of my former position in TASS. But it's been nearly 2 weeks since I left. Emotions are still fresh. And there's been a lot of discussion and speculation. So let's talk about anything else for now.
For TASS, his exit marks the end of an era. Gusman's tenure was defined by international outreach, cultural exchange, and efforts to give Russian media a seat at major global tables, a legacy now acknowledged by Beijing's promise. My dear friend, we will certainly meet again.
Well, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to AnewZ.